So today we are going to discuss about the typical configuration of computer system. The weightage of this chapter is 8 marks. They're going to ask 1 mark 1 question, 2 mark 1 question, and 5 mark 1 question. So let us discuss the 5 marks questions. So what is motherboard? Explain the different types of motherboard. So let us see what you mean by motherboard here. Motherboard is a large printed circuit having many chips, ports, controller, and other electronic components mounted on it. So it is nothing but a large printed circuit. In that board, you will be having many chips, ports, controller, and electronic components. So your motherboard is going to connect the different parts of the computer. So it acts as a central bone of the computer. So it's going to distribute the power to the various parts of the computer. So it is called as a large circuit printed circuit board. So it is called PCB. PCB is nothing but a printed circuit board. So we have a different types of motherboard. So let us see which are the different types of motherboard. First one is XT motherboard. Second one is AT motherboard. Third one is baby AT motherboard. Then we have a ATX motherboard. Here AT motherboard stand for extended technology. So it is the earliest motherboard. It is the earlier time used motherboard. So it is the old model motherboard. So in this motherboard, we have a power connector as a 12 pin. We have a power connector. It will be having the 12-pin power connector. The processor socket here we are going to use as a LIF. So low insert force. So in this AT motherboard we are going to use LIF. It is nothing but a low inserted force socket. Then we have a RAM slot like IDMM. IDMM is nothing but a dual inline memory module, and we have a high SA. ISA is nothing but a industry standard architecture slot. These DIMM and ISA are the memory slots. An example for this motherboard is the Pentium 1 and MMSX and Pentium 2 are the example for the ATX motherboard. So next is the ATX motherboard. So ATX motherboard stand for Advanced Technology Motherboard. So in a ATX motherboard, we have a 20-pin power connector. We have a 20-pin power connector. Then we have the size of this motherboard will be 12 inches wide and 11 inches long. The size of this motherboard will be 12 inches wide and 11 inches long. Then this motherboard have PGA processor socket. This AT motherboard will be having the PGA processor socket. Yeah, PGA is nothing but a pin grid array. So then we have a memory RAM slot like PCI slot, ISA slot with the SD RAM slot. So these are the RAM slots we will be having in the AT motherboard. Next is a baby AT motherboard. So baby AT motherboard is nothing but a combination of AT and XT motherboard. So it has a power connector, 12 pins and 20 pins. Both 12 pin and 20 pins power connector will be having in a baby Haiti motherboard. So this baby Haiti motherboard was introduced in 1987 to reduce the width from 12 inches to 8.5 inches. So here we are going to use the processor socket like PGA. Then we have a RAM slot like SD RAM, DDR RAM, and PCI and ISA slots will be present in the baby Haiti motherboard. Then we have a ATX motherboard. Here ATX motherboard stand for Advanced Technology Extended Motherboard. This is the latest motherboard. All are called as a ATX motherboard because it is designed by ATX form factor. In this motherboard, we have a MGGA processor socket. Here we have a MPGA processor socket and the RAM slots like DDR RAM slot, PCI and AGP slot with the IDE primary and secondary interface we have. Here we have a SATA power connector, 12 pins and 24-pin power connector ports have been presented. Example for this Core 2 Pentium 4 will be the example. So these are the different types of motherboard we have. So next we see the characteristics of the motherboard. So what are the characteristics of the motherboard? We have three types of characteristics of a motherboard, that is form factor, chipset, processor, socket. Your form factor is nothing but a specification of the motherboard. Your specification means nothing but a shape, power supply and dimension. Shape of the motherboard and how we are going to supply a power supply in your motherboard and what kind of board, what kind of dimension you are using in your motherboard, whether it is one dimensional, two dimensional, motherboard shape will be almost geometrical. So the specification will be the form factor. Next is the chipset. Your chipset is nothing but a collection of microchips is called as a chipset. The function of the chipset is to coordinate the data transfer between the various component to the component. Here, the data will be transferred from one component to another component by using the chipset. Next is the processor socket. So here, processor socket will be in a rectangular socket. The processor socket will be in a rectangular socket into which the processor is mounted. Means your CPU will be mounted in a processor socket. So in that we have a square shaped connector which many small connectors will be present, which is located in a computer. This is called as a characteristics of a motherboard. So this is the picture of the motherboard. So this is the motherboard. It is a ATX motherboard. So these are the here. These are the slots which I'm marking that we call as a slots. So this is the processor. This is the slot. Even this is also called as a slot. These are the slots we are going to use here. This is the picture of your motherboard. We'll go with the next topic, that is components of the motherboard. We are going to discuss now the components of the motherboard. So we have 5 types of components of the motherboard. First one is processor. Here processor is nothing but a CPU. CPU is also called as a processor. So CPU is the main component of your computer. So it is CPU is called as a brain of your computer. So this processor is also the main component of the motherboard. So it is called as a brain of the computer. So in this we have 3 types, that is ALU, CU and register. So ALU is nothing but a arithmetic logical unit. You are going to perform the arithmetic operations like addition, multiplication, division. All the arithmetic operation will be performed with a logical operation. Your logical operation is nothing but a hand operation, or operation and not operation. Your hand operation is nothing but a logical multiplication, or operation is nothing but a logical addition. Not operation is nothing but a implementation, complementation, inverter. Then we have a CU. CU is going to take the responsible for organizing the processing of data and info instructions. So all the data which you're sending for processing, it is going to controlled by your CU. Then we have a register. Here register is nothing but a temporary storage area where the data will be stored temporarily. After the usage of the data, the register will be deleted. So this will be happening in your processor. Next is the hard disk controller. So your hard disk controller is the interface that enables the computer to read information to the hard drive. Means here we are going to read and write the information to the hard disk. You're going to write the data, whatever the information you have, you're going to read and write. Operations can be done in your hard disk. So this is controlled by using the IDE. IDE is nothing but an integrated digital electronic cable. By using IDE cable, all the read and write information can be controlled in your hard disk. So IDE cable connects the devices like your CD, DVD, hard disk. All this can be connected. Next is the bus. Bus is nothing but a collections of wires in your computer is called as a bus. So a bus is nothing but a collection of parallel wires that forms a pathway to carry the address, data and control signals. All the signals and address and data will be carried from one component to another component by using the bus. So by using the bus, you can connect one component to the another component. This we call as a bus. Next, we have a slot. Here, slot is nothing but a open space in a computer where you can insert a printed circuit is called as a slot. So printed circuit you can insert into the slot. There will be the space. So that space you can insert the printed circuit board. Like your RAM, you can insert the where you're inserting the RAM, that slot is called as a, that we call as a slot. Next is the disk controller. So let us see what you mean by disk controller. So disk controller is nothing but it is a circuit board that enables the CPU to communicate with the hard disk, floppy disk, or other kind of disk. So hard disk is nothing but hard disk controller is nothing but a circuit board where the CPU is going to communicate with the hard disk, floppy disk, and other kind of disk. So here each what the component you're explaining, that each component will be carrying 1 marks. So these are the different types of component you can use. Next, we are going to discuss about the different types. So let us define what you mean by bus, port, microprocessor, and cache memory and disk controller. A bus is nothing but a collection of wires which carry the signal from one component to another component is called as a bus. Buses are nothing but a wires which is going to carry the data, address, and control signals into the other component is called as a bus. Next, we have a port. Here, port is nothing but a socket used to connect external devices to the computer. Here, we are going to connect the external devices like modem, your mouse, all this can be connected, that we call as a port. Port is a socket used to connect external devices, other devices like your keyboard, mouse, modem, all this you are going to create, where you are going to insert that space we call as a port. Next is the microprocessor. It is nothing but a single integrated circuit chip that function as the computer CPU. Your CPU will be mounted. So collection of microchips will be present. Next, we have a cache memory. So cache memory is a small part that fast intermediate memory present between CPU and a RAM. So we have another type of memory. We have 3 types of memory, that is primary memory, secondary memory, and the cache memory. So it is faster than your primary memory and secondary memory. So it is placed between your CPU and the RAM. So disk controller, what you mean by disk controller? So disk controller is nothing but a circuit that enables the CPU to connect with the hard disk, which is going to enables your CPU to connect with the hard disk we call as a disk controller. Here you're going to connect a hard disk, floppy disk, and other kind of disk drives into the disk controller. So next we are going to discuss about the different types of cache memory. We are going to discuss about the different types of cache memory. Let us see what you mean by different types of cache memory and cache memory. So cache memory is a very high-speed memory placed in between the CPU and the RAM, which can speed up your CPU. So the function of the cache memory is nothing to speed your CPU as much as faster to run. So it acts as a buffer between your CPU and the main memory. So your cache memory will be acting as a buffer between your CPU and the main memory. It is used to hold those of a data and program which are most frequently used by your CPU. So whatever the data hand program, most frequently it is using your CPU will be hold in your cache memory, is going to hold that part in your cache memory. Hence, it is used to increase the speed of the processing. So it already, if whatever the data you repeatedly you are going to use, that's going to stored in your cache memory whenever it required. So it's going to use, by using this, you can speed up your processor. Is nothing but you can speed your CPU. So during processing, the CPU first check the cache for the required data. So while doing the operations, performing the particular operation, first your CPU is going to check the cache memory. In that, if the data is present, is going to take and operate very fast. If the data is not found in the cache, then it looks into the RAM for the data. Then it's going to check in your RAM. This is going to happen in your cache memory. So cache memory is very expansive. So it is smaller in size. So we have the available size of a cache memory is 256 KB to 2 MB. So we have two types of cache memory, that is L1 cache and L2 cache. Here, L1, what you mean by level? L1 is nothing but a level 1. So it is the present, L1 will be present inside the CPU and extremely fast but relatively small. It's a extremely fast but relatively small. The size of L1 cache varies from 32 KB to 52 KB. Next, level 2, it is the situation at the motherboard of the computer. The size of L2 cache varies from 1 MB to 2 MB. So these are the different types of motherboard we will be using in your system. So let us next discuss about the ports. Bus. So let us discuss about what you mean by ports and different types of ports. So your ports is a connector or place used to connect input output peripheral device to the computer system. So port is nothing but a socket on the computer used to connect the external devices to the computer. So your external devices is nothing but your mouse, keyboard, modem, like that you can connect to the computer. That we call as a port. So we have a different types of port, that is serial port, parallel port, USB port, AGP port, and VGA port. Even Ethernet port. These are the different ports we are using here. So let us see what you mean by serial port. So a serial port is also known as communication port. A serial port is also called as a communication port, is used for connecting communication device like mouse module. So this port transfer data serially 1 bit at a time. So your port, we have a serial port is known as a communication port. Your serial port is also called as a communication port. So you can connect the communication device like mouse, modem, etc. and you can transfer the data serially 1 bit at a time. So it is called as a serial port. Next, we have a parallel port. Let us see what you mean by parallel port. Parallel port are used to connect external input output devices like printer or scanner. Your printer scanner where you connect that port we call as a parallel port. They carry 8 bit at a time. So they can transfer the data 8 bit at a time. So the communication wire to interface with the communication will be 8 bit. Next, we have a USB. So USB is nothing but a universal serial bus. So here USB is advanced input-output port that is used to connect the varieties of newer peripheral like printer, scanner, digital camera, webcam, speaker, pen drives, etc. to the computer. Your USB is a plug and play. That means the device work with computer system as soon as they are connected. So USB transmit data with a high speed. So up to 127 device can be connected through your USB. So by using the USB, you can connect 125 devices. Next, we have a AGP port. Yeah, accelerated graphic port. It is used to connect graphic card that provide high-speed video. So high-speed video is going to perform for playing when you're playing the games and if you're using the multimedia application. That time, high-speed video will be displayed by using the graphic card that is controlled by your AGP port, that is accelerated graphic port. Next is a VGA port, visual graphic adapter port, used to connect monitor to the computer video card. Your video card will be connected to the monitor to display. These are the different ports we are using in your motherboard. So what is bus? Explain the different types of bus. Here bus is nothing but a collection of wires parallel. This is called as a bus that going to transfer the data from one component to the another component inside the computer or between the different components in a computer. So here different components may be CPU, input output unit and memory units are connected to each other by using the bus. So we have two types of bus. That is called as a internal bus and the external bus. Let us see what you mean by internal bus. So internal bus connects all the internal component of the computer like processor to the computer. So your internal component, your internal bus is going to connect different components like processor, RAM, etc. that we call as a system bus. So it is also called as a system bus. Here in an internal bus, we have the different types, that is control bus, data, that is we have a control bus, data bus and address bus. Let us see what you mean by control bus. It transmits the signal to control and coordinate the operation of the computer system. So It's nothing but it's going to transmit the signal to control and coordinate the operations of the computer system is called as a control bus. Next is the data bus. So data bus is nothing but it's going to provide the path to transfer the data between CPU and the memory. So it's going to transfer the data from CPU to the memory, that may be main memory. The data bus may consist of 32, 64 and 128 lines of wire. So it may contain 32, 64 and 128 lines of wires. So this is going to happen in your data bus. Next is the address bus. It connects the CPU and RAM. It's going to connect the CPU and RAM with a set of lines of wires similar to the data bus. So your address bus is going to connect with the several buses to connect the CPU and the RAM. Why it's going to connect like that? To transfer the address between the device take place by the address bus. So it's going to transfer the address between the device take place by the address bus. Means whatever the data and instruction which has been stored to transfer that, it's going to take place. So these are the internal bus. Let us see what you mean by external bus. So external bus connects the different external device peripheral expansion slot to the rest of the computer. The external bus allow various devices to be attached to the computer, thus expanding the computer capability. So it is also called as an expansion bus and is lower than the system bus. So your external bus will be working slower than your system bus. So your internal bus will work very fast compared to the external bus. So next, let us discuss about the power supply. We will discuss about the different power supply. What you mean by power supply? So explain the types of power supply. We have two types of power supply, that is SMPS and UPS. So SMPS is nothing but a switch node power supply. UPS is nothing but a uninterruptible power supply. Let us see what you mean by power supply. So electronic power is the main source of a supply for the operation of electronic components of the computer. So electronic power should be supplied to perform the operations which are used in your computer. Therefore, continuous power supply is essential for the computer to prevent them from failure. So you require essential power supply to the computer to prevent them from the failure, breakdown or shutdown. So we will be using the two types of power supply, that is SMPS and UPS. Let us see what you mean by SMPS. Your SMPS is going to convert electrical current from AC line circuit from electronic device. So it is going to convert AC power to the DC power. Then the SMPS connects the power card plug, a fan for cooling between its generator lot of heat. So in your computer, the fan in your CPU, the fan has been present because your SMPS is going to create a lot of heat. To cool that, we are going to use that fan. So SMPS contain the power card plug, a fan for cooling your SMPS to reduce the heat produced by that. Then your SMPS convert 230 volts of AC to 5 to 12 volts of DC. And the weightage is around 180 to 300 watts and 450 watts to 500 watts. So this is the functions of your SMPS. Next, we have a UPS. So what do you mean by UPS? So UPS is a power supply that allow your computer to keep running from the least a short time when the main power source goes off. When your main power is off, then your UPS will be used. So it includes a battery to maintain power in the event of power failure. So we require the battery to maintain her power when the power goes a failure. So UPS keeps a computer running for several minutes to few hours after a power failures. We in a UPS, we have two types, that is offline and online. Let us see what you mean by online UPS. So online UPS is nothing but a power supply flow through an inverter where the main power supply is on or off. In this, inverter is on continuously. The advantages of using this online UPS is give good continuity of power supply, no user interaction. The disadvantages of online UPS is it is more costly than the offline UPS. Let us see what you mean by offline UPS. Here, offline UPS is also called as standby UPS. So the inverter does not remain in on state. In a online UPS, the inverter state was on, but in a offline, the inverter state will be not on, it will be off. Instead, it switches on only when the main power supply gets off. Only when main power is going to switch off, then it's going to on the switch. So advantages of this is less expensive. Disadvantages requires user interaction. In offline, we need a user interaction to operate. So this is the one of the disadvantage of the offline UPS. So these are the important questions that's going to occur in your main exam.